Why are US airports so bad? Well, that was the very question asked by CNBC in a video that went viral. The video from the famous American business channel took a critical eye at airports around the globe and compared them to those in the United States. Singapore's Changi Airport, it says, has a butterfly garden and a movie theater. Qatar's Hamad Airport has a swimming pool and a gym. Munich's airport has a pop-up holiday market at Christmas time. And then there's LaGuardia, which, yeah, it's gross.
A stowaway at LaGuardia Airport here to report. Look at this, caught on video. Moment the raccoon falls from the ceiling near a Spirit Airlines gate.
And the culprit for this depressing and dilapidated experience? Well, according to CNBC, it's the government.
In the United States, there is no proper quota. The European airports have found better ways to extract higher dollar amount from their passengers.
I'm sorry. I have to stop this video because someone please reassure me that out of the 3.2 million people who watched this video, some of them had to realize that this was propaganda, right? And pretty inaccurate propaganda at that. Remember the 3 airports cited in the video as examples of the fancy luxury airports that Americans don't have? Changi, Hamad, and Munich? All 3 of these are public airports. Changi is owned by the Singaporean government, Hamad by the Qatar Civil Aviation Authority, and Munich is operated by Flughafen München GmbH, which is jointly owned by the state of Bavaria, the Republic of Germany, and the city of Munich. In the end, this video is just another hit piece on publicly funded social services and repeats fallacies that somehow the private sector is better than the public sector. Why are US airports so cash-strapped compared to their global competitors? And what is the real lesson to learn here about funding quality public services? Well, let's get started. But before we dive into the meat of the video, I think we should first start by just taking a look at the title of the CNBC video: Why US Airports Are So Bad. For starters, this clearly paints the entirety of American aviation and airport user experience with a single brush that I don't think is fair. There are actually some really nice airports in the United States. Denver International Airport is modern and easy to navigate. Chicago's O'Hare Airport is directly linked to the city's public transit network with an underground Blue Line terminal. And the Jackson Hole Airport, while small, is architecturally stunning, and also the only airport inside a national park, Grand Teton National Park to be specific. Now, while I do think that a lot of the arguments made in the CNBC video were done in bad faith, I do think that there is a point that perhaps even the best, nicest international airport in the United States is objectively quite a bit less nice than a lot of the other global airports out there. I mean, CNBC wasn't completely wrong. Changi Airport, for example, is insanely beautiful, and their cutting-edge technology makes travel incredibly seamless. For instance, you can check your bags from different terminals, no matter what airline, and they'll still end up in the correct flight. Hamad Airport in Qatar is a literal tropical oasis. Munich's airport features an idyllic Christmas market where you can really enjoy a glass of Glühwein during a layover in the holiday season. And Bahrain's airport offers a dedicated entertainment zone to keep children of all ages entertained while waiting for their flight, featuring interactive toys, gaming consoles, and climbing domes. Now, Garrett's Popcorn at Chicago O'Hare is really great. I personally recommend it. But it doesn't make up for the fact that Chicago O'Hare has 0 play spaces for their kids in their international terminal. I fly in and out of there at least once per year, and I have nowhere to take my kids to let off steam before a 9-hour long haul back to Germany. And this isn't just my subjective opinion either. If you just take a second and Google why US airports are so bad, well, the top articles you'll find are going to use adjectives like awful, dated, and atrocious to describe the state of American aviation facilities. Now, as I said at the start of this video, if you were to take CNBC at their word, Why are US airports so bad? Well, the genesis of their thesis and the real culprit for this poor experience is the government.
For the most part, airports in the US are publicly owned and operated by either a city, a county, a state, or in some cases, a public authority. Despite America's capitalist-driven economy, it's actually Europe that has taken the lead on privatizing its airports. In 2018, more than 50% of European airports had some form of private ownership.
Many of the European airports are run by private entities that are looking to maximize shareholder return and gain a profit. In the United States, there is no proper code.
But let's stop here for a second. The video just stated that in Europe, 50% of airports have some form of private ownership. So I wanted to look into that data a little bit. Well, it turns out that the actual number is 41% as of 2025. Granted, this number has risen from 22% when compared to 2010, which is notable, but I'm still quite confused on how a video from 5 years ago was off by that significant of a margin. But I digress, because I think the real issue that I have with this statistic, beyond the fact that I think it's probably wrong, is actually in how it's being presented and supported, which is really misleading. You see, the video goes on to quote Senior Vice President of Moody's, S𝗨𝗣𝗢𝗥𝗧, who says that in the US, there is no profit motive, and the European airports have found
better ways to extract higher dollar amount from their passengers.
But the actual statistic is not that 50% of airports in Europe are privately owned. It's that 50% of airports in Europe have some form of private ownership. So even airports that are overwhelmingly and predominantly owned by the federal governments in their respective countries, but have a small bit of private equity, would fall under this statistic. Furthermore, the video makes absolutely zero distinction that overwhelmingly the private companies that manage these airports are still overwhelmingly owned by the federal government. And to explain this, I'll use an example. Let's take a look at Zürich's airport. Owned by Flughafen Zürich AG, they are a publicly traded company on the SIX Swiss exchange, who operate the airport on behalf of the Swiss government. However, upon investigation of their bookkeeping records, it is still the public who has the greatest vested interest in the company. The major shareholders include the Canton of Zurich with 33.33 plus 1 of the shares, and the City of Zurich with 5% of the shares. No other shareholder has a holding which exceeds 3%. And the same is true when you look across Europe. Are many airports part of a public-private partnership? Yes. Does the structure mean that airports are allowed to turn a profit? Also yes. But in the vast majority of these cases, the government is the largest shareholder, with a dominant control of the finances, and the government typically also is allowed to appoint many people who sit on the board of directors. Charles de Gaulle in Paris is owned by a public company, Groupe ADP. However, according to French Transport Code, the French government must remain the majority shareholder, and a third of the board of directors are government appointees. In the German capital, the shareholders of Flughafen Berlin-Brandenburg GmbH are the federal states of Berlin and Brandenburg, each with a share of 37%, and the Federal Republic of Germany with a share of 26%. Interestingly, the largest fully privatized airport in Europe isn't exactly known for having a great user experience. Apologies in advance to my British viewers, but you are probably aware that Heathrow Airport was famously privatized by Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, where the government sold off its capital interest in the airport. And today, I don't think many would characterize it as a luxury experience for flyers.
It's the latest in a series of disruptions at UK airports caused by major staff shortages.
The thing is, this CNBC video really paints a highly distorted picture on what the financing structures actually are for the majority of airports in Europe, and in my opinion, gives far too much credit to private industry and private equity firms for the success of these successful airports. And by the way, guys, since we're talking about media propaganda and bias, it begs the question, what tools do you use to make sure that you're getting the full story and unlock international content to make sure that you get different points of view? Well, speaking personally, my favorite tool to use is a VPN. Specifically, a VPN from Surfshark, who's the sponsor of today's video. If you don't know what a VPN is, it stands for Virtual Private Network, and it encrypts all of the data sent between your computer and the internet so no one can steal your personal information. But a VPN can be used for so much more than security. It can also be used to help change the virtual location of your computer, unlocking news articles and online websites that wouldn't normally be available in your area, which is a very handy tool that I actually use to do the research for videos just like this one. Had it not been for my VPN, I wouldn't have been able to unlock US government websites and certain local news reports, which normally are blocked for computers with an EU IP address. So if you don't already have a VPN, I can highly recommend checking out Surfshark. We recently made the switch because it has excellent speed performance, plus I can use one account for multiple devices when I'm traveling. So secure your privacy with Surfshark today. Enter coupon code TYPEASHTON for 4 months extra at surfshark.com/typeashton. Plus, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to try it out. To get started, click the link down below in the description of this video. Now, we need to be careful here because privatizing a government-owned company is very, very different from an airport being bought, sold, and managed by a private equity firm. And this distinction and the chasm between these two things can actually be highlighted by the few attempts that have been made to privatize major airports in the United States. Take, for example, Midway Airport in Chicago. Way back in the early 2000s, the city of Chicago was struggling financially, and like a lot of municipalities, they were looking to sell off assets in order to raise capital. In 2004, the city sold the Chicago Skyway to a private investment group for a 99-year operational lease of $1.8 billion. Chicago's parking meters were also privatized in 2008 under a 75-year agreement to generate $1.2 billion in revenue. But selling off Midway meant that this would be the first time that a major international U.S. airport would be privatized. To do it, they needed to go through the FAA's Airport Privatization Pilot Program, in which private companies are encouraged to own, manage, lease, or develop public airports, which in turn are expected to generate economic activity locally and increase government revenue streams. The major deal brokered by this program would have sold Midway to a consortium entity known as Midway Investment and Development, comprised of 2 American companies, John Hancock Life Insurance Company and City Infrastructure Investors, and 1 Canadian company, YVR Airport Services Limited of Vancouver. Their offer was to lease the airport from the city of Chicago for $2.52 billion over 99 years. But ultimately, the deal fell apart, largely due to bad timing. It was 2008-2009, and the consortium's inability to raise the capital during the Great Recession blocked the successful completion of this transaction. Chicago did take another run at privatizing Midway in 2013, but it seemed from a distance that the energy had gone out from both the city's interest in seeing the deal through, and more importantly, the money was just not as good as the 2009 offer. The thing is that when it comes to airport finances in the United States, the availability of government funds, fee incomes, income from concessions, etc., has usually been enough, especially when combined with access to capital markets, some of which are tax-advantaged. Now, this is not to say that U.S. airports have all of the funding that they need. There probably is a healthy discussion to be had there, but it really is worth pointing out that the same hunger for basic funding that incentivizes airports to go private here in Europe, especially the incentives that happened in the 1980s when Heathrow was privatized, for example, well, that just isn't present in the United States. Things are not nearly as dire as Heathrow in the 80s, not even by a long shot. In fact, it's rare in U.S. aviation to hear that a major airport is throwing their hands up and saying that they're out of money. And interestingly, you can thank the automobile for their financial solvency. At most U.S. airports, parking is a cash cow. According to FAA numbers, U.S. airports' income from parking, ground transportation, and rental cars far exceed revenues from food and retail. Though it is worth pointing out that revenue is declining somewhat with the rise of ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft, for example. Yet still, parking alone represents roughly 37% of all non-aeronautical revenue in North America. And this is something that international hubs like Singapore, like Zurich, like Paris, for example, don't really need to rely as heavily on, because after all, they cater predominantly to international travelers, and they typically have really great interconnected public transit networks. For a point of comparison, 44% of passengers, visitors, and employees travel to Zurich Airport by public transport, while at Newark, arguably the best connected major airport in the United States, had only roughly 16% of arrivals with public transit. From my perspective, the message that CNBC is trying to promote in this video is that the problem with American airports is just simply that we haven't let corporations run them. They're seeming to say that if we want to keep up with the rest of the world, we have to privatize now. We have to dump this inefficient public model and allow profit-seeking companies full control over our airports. Unfortunately, because this also tends to be the prevailing idiom in neoliberal America, this message clearly resonated with the millions of viewers who watched this video. But respectfully, I don't think Americans are really truly going to get what they're craving by privatizing public airports. I don't think they're actually going to be able to extract higher value dollars out of passengers by turning to private equity firms. Personally, I wouldn't hold your breath on getting passengers better family facilities, a botanical garden to stroll through during a layover, or an ice skating rink in the winter months. Instead, these dollars are just going to flow into the pocket of whatever corporate owners you sold your airport to at a rock-bottom price. And travelers are going to remain miserable. And might I ask rhetorically on how well this has worked out for us thus far in the United States when it comes to privatizing the public sector? I mean, it certainly hasn't made housing more affordable. It hasn't made prisons more efficient or equitable. And I'm still waiting on American healthcare to get cheaper and have less overhead than public models in other countries. The real solution is that you have to invest in your public resources if you want them to be good. If you're sitting back hoping that just simply by changing the ownership structure that you can magically change the airport, you're going to be waiting a heck of a long time. Here in Europe, many airports are now run as businesses focused on air connectivity development, operational efficiency, service quality, revenue diversification, and sustainable investments. But the vast majority of those quote-unquote businesses are public-private partnerships that continue to keep the public interest as a majority interest. They retain a golden share in the management company for themselves and limit foreign ownership of such firms to protect what they regard as a precious commodity in the name of protecting national security. Airports are a vital public good that should be run for the benefit of the public and not profit-driven motives. Good infrastructure is costly, and you have to make those investments in them. In the United States, it is an extraordinarily pervasive libertarian myth that the government is woefully incapable of managing any enterprise well. This is in part because in the United States, we do have quite a few institutions that are badly managed, and they help fuel this myth.
You're going to have to take that somewhere else. All right, you know what? I'm on break.
So rallying the troops around the quote-unquote failure of American public goods, systems, and services, from schools to trains to airports, and letting the free market take over seems like a no-brainer, right? But this is, in my opinion, plainly false. Because if you look around the globe, especially here in Europe, you're going to find great airports, great schools, great trains, great public services, and they're not privatized. They're not run by private equity firms. And listen, I get it. Comparing the United States to Europe, particularly when it comes to infrastructure, is inherently problematic because you're dealing with wildly different population densities as well as vastly different governance structures. But all of that being said, I think even the most overblown budget infrastructure projects here in Europe still tend to look fiscally responsible and somewhat constrained in comparison to the projects that happen in the United States. Take, for example, the brand new Berlin airport. It cost an eye-watering 6.5 billion euros. Meanwhile, over in the United States, upgrading the AirTrain at Newark. Yes, just upgrading the existing AirTram. Just the 3-mile or 4.8-kilometer monorail people mover project has ballooned to $3.5 billion US. That's right, half the cost of an entire airport built from scratch. You know, at the end of the day, again, my opinion, full disclaimer, but this CNBC video really blurs the details in order to promote an overall message that government bad, capitalism good. That just seems to be so pervasive in the United States. But in my opinion, we don't need to privatize our infrastructure network. We just need to learn to invest in it smartly. But I do think this would be a really good point at the end of this video to ask you to let me know down in the comment section on what your favorite airport is. And if you could also take a look and see, how is that airport funded and structured? Is it government owned or is it actually private? And do you think that makes a difference in your overall customer experience? I'll contribute to this discussion by saying that the two most frequent airports that I fly out of, because I live here in the Black Forest of Germany, tend to be either Frankfurt or Zurich, simply because of proximity. And I'm sorry, Germany, but I vastly prefer to fly out of Zurich's airport. Swiss Airlines has a special check-in counter just for families, and you can hear the sound of the Alps, like yodeling and cowbells, as you effortlessly glide to the various gates in their underground tram. It's delightful. But that's just my personal opinion. I'd love to hear yours down below in the comment section of this video. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!